Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Humans 2.0 podcast. This is your host, Mark Metry. Today, I'm joined by Ishveen. Ishveen, how are you?
Yeah, nice to see you.
Absolutely. So the first question that I always start off to ask my guests is, how do you spend your time here on planet Earth?
Yeah, big opening question. I think doing two things. One is doing what makes you happy. I think that's super important because if you're not happy, then chances are no one else around you is going to feel good vibes from you. And then me personally, I think I spend most of my time thinking about what will make the people I care about proud. So whether that's my parents, my husband, myself, my in-laws, whoever it may be, living up to their expectations of me.
That's awesome. And, what you said at the beginning, I think that really hits the core of each one of us, right? Like today, we're at this event called Podcast Row. I do this with, great people. This is what I love doing, and I, live for it. And it's so awesome. But I also remember a time in my life where I wasn't doing what made me happy, and I was super unhappy doing what I did. And I'm curious to ask you, was there a time in your life where you weren't necessarily super happy with what you're doing on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, absolutely. I think change only comes or should only come when you're unhappy. Quick note there, I think too many people change things for the wrong reasons. So I remember early on, I'd have friends who were like, oh, I'm going to move jobs. And it's like, why? And they're like, yeah, I think there might be something better. It's like, well, you're actually unhappy, right? Like, don't fix what's not broken. But whether it's, my first job, I was a management consultant. I loved everything about it in terms of great people, enjoyed wearing a suit every day. I was living in London. But fundamentally, I wasn't happy with the impact I was making, I suppose. And I'd played sports all my life and I wanted to be within the sports industry. So I went off and did that. There are times definitely at, other places, especially running the company, where I felt stuck. And I moved out to San Francisco for 6 months to join an accelerator. So absolutely, I think anytime that there's been major change in my life, it's because there was deep-rooted unhappiness somewhere else.
Yeah. I love what you said about the beginning of don't fix what's not broken, and people just sort of like always trying to like hit that next thing, or like I saw this thing and it was like there's that quote, it's like the grass is greener on the other side of the fence. And then I saw somebody else was like, no, sometimes it's not. Sometimes you just gotta, be grateful and present with the grass that you already have. So I really love that. Where did you grow up?
England.
Okay. Yeah. I'm curious to hear a little bit about, like sort of like your first years in England, just like growing up. Any experiences, any kind of stories that like you look back on today that like either really impacted you or like slowly began to shift you on your course today, on this path that you're on?
So I grew up in Manchester. My parents still live there. I then studied at Oxford, economics and management, and then moved to London. I'd say that I've always been one of these people who's okay with the fact that things change, right? So, you leave school and you think you're going to be best friends with everyone for the rest of your life. And then you leave university and you think you're going to like have 100 friends the rest of your life, that you're all going to see each other every weekend. And things change. And especially when I moved from London to India, 2009 to be a sports agent, same thing, right? And so this idea of FOMO, that sets in pretty young and most people have it. I think I was pretty good at like, I'm okay not having that. And probably because, I had fairly conservative Indian parents. So I remember like everyone was the same 12 till 14, and then 15, 16, like some of my friends started going out Saturday nights clubbing and I wasn't necessarily allowed. Like it doesn't make me miserable. Like I had a beautiful experience doing stuff with my family and other types of friends. And so I think just that idea around you have to adapt and people change and you change, and you should just be really happy with make the best of kind of what you have, because it's probably like the same thing, grass is always greener. Like maybe it's probably better than what someone else is doing.
I love that. And why did you go from London to India?
I felt that I actually grew up going to India every 2 or 3 years and absolutely hated it.
Really?
Just the poverty, like, I don't know, like we went to this city called Bhopal, which is where my mom's from, and everyone would look at you funny, and I wasn't allowed to wear what wanted to wear, and it was always hot and whatever else. And then I think I went when I was like 18, and I just found this newfound respect with this idea that everyone's actually okay. Like the person with 5 rupees in their pocket could be happier than the person with 1,000,000 rupees in their bank or 1,000,000,000 rupees. And so I just think that appreciation of different cultures. And actually it's funny now that I look back, I can tell you that there are 2 types of people who travel and live places. One who, and both are fine, but one type of person who will go somewhere and always try and create the same environment as where they've come from, right? So I'm a New Yorker, I live in a high-rise building, I'm going to move to India, I'm going to try and find a high-rise building with a swimming pool, I'm going to be surrounded by XYZ, I'm going to make sure my friendship group is all expats, blah, blah, blah. And that's great, that's fine as well. I've actually been much more of the sense like you go somewhere and you live that culture and don't try and create it what it is. And maybe you'll only spend 2 years there or a year, and maybe it'll be tougher, but at least like don't try and change things because usually you can't. And so I think that realization from myself that I could move to India and be okay with the disparity and with the way things are done there and still survive is, it was pretty mind-blowing.
Well, yeah. So you so you sort of like set this out as like a almost like a challenge for yourself.
I just thought India's unique. I'm obviously from there originally in terms of my parents from there. I'm pretty sure I told my job, like, I'll be back in 6 months. Like, almost thought of it as a comment, obviously stayed out 3 years. And it was tough, like really, really tough. But yeah, I just thought, go in and do something different. Like I do love change. And I was 24, so I suppose I didn't really realize at the time. But now I look back and I think, obviously, I love being outside of my comfort zone.
That's so cool. And especially, when it comes to like just heading into the unknown in general, especially like, like my parents immigrated from Egypt to the US, but I was born here. But there's like this very, like you said, like to hang out with the same people that look like you and, your sort of same group and create that environment really everywhere you go. And I feel like it takes a really kind of special, discernment or maybe past experience to be able to be like, I know what this is, but I'm just going to head in this other way because I know it might be better.
Yeah. And I suppose also like, why ever move if you're going to just try and take what you want with you, right? So I am so okay with the person who's never left New York and this is what they want, right? That's fine. But like what does, don't go to a place like India and say you live there if you didn't really live there kind of thing, right? So I think it's all about just embrace that environment. You go on holiday and whatever that culture is, embrace it and then happily return to your own. But like that appreciation is really important.
Yeah, I totally agree. And, so you go to India and you're like, I'm going to start entering into like the sports industry, right?
Yeah, so I actually did secure a job before I moved out. So I it was a bit easier. Like I landed, I was picked up by distant relatives that I didn't even recognize. I'm sure they didn't recognize me at the airport. It was wonderful, so homely. They took me to their home and I went straight into the office that day, like landing from London to India. But, and yeah, it was amazing. Like it was just tough, but it was such a different experience. Yeah.
And so why specifically sports?
Well, so I grew up playing sports and, going back to that comment about my parents were a little bit more conservative, but sports was, I suppose, what always allowed me to have an equal footing with any kind of counterpart. So, I was captain of multiple sports teams. And I think thanks to sports, like I wasn't seen as conservative or, whatever else, like religious or whatever else. 100%. And so I think sports was one of those things that regardless of what circle I moved in, when I got to Oxford as well, it was super tough, right? Like a lot of people were I went to a posh girls' school, so it wasn't like I came from the ghetto or anything, but like a lot of these people were very southern and northern and southern. It's like in America being from the south versus from north. And so I think playing sports and being good at sports always meant that I was welcomed into any circle. And so I really wanted to get more young females, especially of Indian origin, into sports. So tried to find a job in sports policy, and then someone gave me the advice that if I knew how to monetize through sponsorship, then I'd be taken a bit more seriously. So I really fell into sponsorship. It wasn't a passion, but yeah, now that I'm in it, I love it.
Yeah. So when you were on that path discovering sponsorship, did you realize like how big of an issue it was like in the industry when it comes to athletes being sponsored and how the whole industry works?
Oh, no idea. Yeah. Like, no idea. Didn't, I mean, every aspect of the move is unique, right? So like I am truly in sales. I mean, as a CEO, you should always be in sales technically, but like when you talk about sales, people think it's a taboo career, right? Like no one studies sales. Like when you think of the quintessential sales guy, like slick back hair, like wheeler dealer, whatever it may be. And so selling sponsorship taught me how to sell, put myself out there and things like that. And I am so grateful for that. So I think one was just like, I encourage everyone to go out there and learn how to sell. Like take a sales job, regardless of what it is, because it's such an amazing skill set. So that was interesting that like sales as an industry is so big. And then B, obviously sponsorship. I mean, it is $60 billion global industry, but the point being it's literally for the elite, right? Like you see, you'll see these deals like SoFi just sponsored the Rams stadium like for however many million. What does that even mean? No one really knows. The people on the inside too, but not on the outside. And so sponsorship is the backbone of sports, in my opinion. Like, why do sports teams get moved? Because there's more sponsors in LA or Vegas or whatever, marathons will get cancelled because they can't fund it because there's a lack of sponsorship. And so it is pretty amazing to be in an industry that like literally is the backbone of sports.
Wow, never thought about it like that. So I want to hear a little bit more about the journey of, you beginning to sort of like follow your passion and then discover the side of the industry and then actually get out there, make a legitimate solution. And like, I know you were, named like, top 100 female CEO by Inc. So, and, your company works with, all kinds of professional, like really up there organizations around the world.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear like, how did you start that?
Yeah.
Like that idea, that execution.
So, I suppose I was always probably entrepreneurial without really realizing it. So I was really interested in cross-border. So obviously having moved from England to India and then even within India, I traveled to South Africa, Bangladesh, West Indies, and all these other countries for sports. And so I was really obsessed with like, why is Pepsi's offices in like the UK and the US UK and India not talking to each other? Like why they're not sharing assets? Like why deals not getting done cross border? Like global media rights had become such a big thing, right? Like this idea that you'd sit down and watch Manchester United while living in India, but literally it was only Manchester United who were doing global sponsorship deals, like no one else. And so really was interested in that. And that's how I've started a company of my own to do cross-border deals. And it was through that I was literally toiling with it for like a couple of years. And then one day I was like, why is there not an Airbnb for this? Like it would just make it so much easier. So I suppose I'm still solving that problem of like getting deals done, but I'm also now building a tech business which has its own ins and outs kind of thing. And so so the whole company started because I love sponsorship. I believe deals should get done, and I don't think there should be inefficiencies such as did you meet the right person to get those deals done.
I see. So you were somebody that like you said you always played sports in your life, but you weren't actually in the sports industry, and you had a different background that then enabled you to sort of like come in with a different perspective that, sometimes a lot of experts, a lot of people that are like in the field, quote unquote, doing it, they're focused about like, today and tomorrow, incremental benefit, not so much like somebody coming in from the outside with multiple sets of experiences applying like, oh wait, we could do it this whole other way that's way more efficient and, really build on top of that. So that's awesome. I'm curious, like, my journey as an entrepreneur, it was very, very rough at the beginning. Had no idea what I was doing. Very many nights where I was like, should I just stop doing this?
Yeah.
I'm curious to hear from you, like, when you first started it, did you have any kinds of fears, insecurities, and like how did your thinking on that grow over time, if that makes sense?
Yeah. I think you constantly are battling with challenges, personal challenges, right? So whether it's what's the opportunity cost of me not having a job that would pay me a corporate salary and give me a life that's a lot more balanced than being an entrepreneur, or whether it's you're hiring people and people leave, people come, and management is really tough. Whether it's the fact that like regardless of what you do, someone's always have done it a little bit better, right? So I remember this one person who was like, if you raise money, first they'll ask you how much, you'll tell them the right amount, and then they'll say, well, who from? There's very few companies that will have raised the right amount from the perfect investors and nothing, no complaints. And so I think there's a constant just like battle of like just being okay with what you've achieved so far. And I wish we'd gone faster, I wish we were bigger, I wish XYZ, but you can't battle with those because that's not going to help you tomorrow.
Yeah, that's really so true. And I'm curious to hear from you. Did you have to, on your entrepreneurial journey, did you have to like shift the idea? Did you have to shift the way you guys executed it based on any kind of like failure, any kind of feedback that you got from the market?
I think it's really important to listen to what the market tells you in terms of messaging and be a bit adaptable. So controversially, like we're called open sponsorship. Sponsorship is an industry that's been around for like decades. And one that I absolutely love. Influencer marketing is an industry that I am not so bullish on. Maybe because I'm not so swayed by like the Kardashians of the world. And so I remember pretty early on when the first time someone called us an influencer marketing agency or platform, I was pretty upset with it, and I was like, absolutely not, this is who we are. And now I'm actually okay with that being our messaging, that we're influencer marketing for sports, and that comes with a bit of maturity, that like you may want to believe your product is X, but actually you sit Y. And also as a business decision, if influencer marketing today is trending and that's what people are looking for, and there are people being hired with the title influencer marketing manager, I would be an absolute fool to say that's not us, because there's no one being hired for sponsorship manager at like the Birchboxes of the world. And so I think it's like, it's not about shifting necessarily business. It's about adapting, like whether it's pricing structure, whether it's messaging, whether it's website, whatever it may be. I think you're constantly adjusting certain things to work with the world, what the world is telling you.
Yeah, and I love that. And I also feel like, I didn't grow up as an athlete or anything of the sort, but, as I've grown over time and as I've like interviewed like professional athletes, Olympians and whatnot, I've really, really began to understand that, when you're engaging in like physical exercise, especially if you're doing it at a professional level, you build a certain mindset, you build a certain psychology that is just used to like trying again and again and again and again, used to, some level of pain and struggling and jumping over that. I love that. I wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
I mean, I remember I once said to my husband, I was like, I'm so glad I played sports because it taught me how to lose. He obviously, as an American, laughed at me and said he only plays sports to win. But the point being is, I think like there is a lot of assets in sport, whether it's like, I was interviewing someone once and I was like, do you think you could do sales? Sales can be monotonous. And she was like, she was a professional swimmer. And she was like, all I do is get into the pool and I swim the same thing every day by myself. Like you're so regimented. And I think there are definitely qualities that you start realizing that sports, and it could be music. I think anything where you've had to commit to it for the long term, like even like playing a violin, like there are bad days, there are good days. Practicing is boring at times. Like you may enter into a competition or be part of a band and not get picked. So there's so much about like having extracurricular things that you've stuck with that teach you a lot later in life.
I love that. And when you were mentioning that lady that you were speaking to, I'm curious, like in terms of when you first started your company, were you a solo founder? Were you a co-founder? Was it a team?
Yeah, good question. So solo founder, and then about a year in, I hired someone in who was amazing, is amazing. And so a little bit like a marriage, I asked him if he would be my technical co-founder. And so why that's really important for me is because A, I'm not technical, but B, there is someone internally who's like my support system. And then the other bit is that knowing that he is everything I want in a co-founder, but we will probably at some point, I'm sure we will hire above him. So we'll hire a CTO above him. It shows what his worth is to the company, even if he doesn't have the most senior title.
I see. I ask because, a lot of people out there, they might like start with some sort of like a side hustle while they're in like their job or in college, and then they try to make that into a real business. And always like, the hiring people, like the first sort of group of people that you get together can be a really like, nerve-wracking brand new experience for a lot of people. And, I'm just, aside from your co-founder, I'm just curious on how you went about that journey.
Yeah, I mean, I would actually say that you can never predict. Like, I was just thinking, like, if I was to start another company, I would want to make sure that I have, like, maybe 2 different co-founders. However, I've also met like lots of people who have had tons of issues with their early co-founders, which causes its own headaches. So, unfortunately, I don't think there's a one rule for it. There are a couple of things. Like we hired very early on a really good sales guy who was really great for that time. But as I said, that need to adapt is really important in your early hires. Otherwise, what happens is you start having resistance from, this one guy was brilliant, but he could have easily have stayed a 3-person company for the rest of his life. Like he was very happy in that comfort zone. Okay. So I think having people with the mindset that we're going to scale this is really important. But then the person who wants to scale too quickly, if you don't scale and then they leave you. So it's such a balance, and unfortunately there's not really a right or wrong answer.
Yeah, definitely. Like most things in life, for sure. I'm curious to, this is one of my favorite questions. I'm curious, on like your day-to-day when either you're running your business or you're doing the daily duties and responsibilities that you have as, not just a business owner, but, there's a ton of other roles and positions like we all do in life. Are there any times where, you might feel overwhelmed or confused or not at your best? And like, do you have like any methodology or anything that you have done over the years to help yourself?
Yeah, good question.
Yeah.
I think you can't overwhelmed. I think the main thing is like I do believe like I personally like handwritten lists. I think it's very comforting to be able to tick things off or like cross them out. So I think overwhelmed is just coming from I have way too many things to do. How am I going to get through them? And when you start writing them out, you even realize like priority, you can do things like that. So I think handwritten lists, ticking things off, showing yourself that you have made progress is really important. In terms of confusion or like what we were saying, like being stuck, I have an advisor who I turn to fairly often for things. So I think that helps. It is someone who I don't ask them for what I should do. I ask them what they did in similar situations, and I'm pretty good at pattern matching, and I think that's really important because no one really knows your business or what you're thinking better than you. But I do think it's nice to say, like if you felt like you wanted to take your podcast to the next level, like going to speak to someone saying, well, what did you do? And maybe you can pattern match, but not asking their opinion on you, right? Yeah. Because that's just like pulled out of thin air. So I think asking people around you, like, how did they get out, is really good. And then I personally do love to exercise, and I think exercise can bring the ability to have some clarity in thought and like, the switch. I think switching off is really, really, really important. Like whether it's like binging a show for 6 hours just so that your mind stops working and you can come back to your problems.
Yeah, shifting that
Yeah.
state of mind and being able to go from one to the other. I love that. And I'm just curious, last question. Do you view yourself as sort of a like role model for a lot of people that maybe like are younger ladies or people that come from your ethnicity, from India, having like such great success here in the biggest city in America and doing awesome things?
Yeah, well, ideally I'd be a role model for everyone, gender or ethnic, regardless. But obviously there's an element of role model for everyone, but the people I'm trying to really inspire is people like me, who maybe think it's impossible to do something or whatever else. But then also at the same time, I've got so much more to achieve. So sometimes it's hard to be like, yay, look at me, do what I'm doing, because I know what I'm battling with. So I think it's more just a case of we're living in an era today where it's very encouraging for everyone around you to make your own. But there is a lot of like, you have to toot your own horn kind of thing. And I think PR or being on podcasts or whatever else it's really important so people hear your story, because there are a million amazing people out there who are doing, I'm sure, much better things than me, but I'm just lucky that I'm in a circle where I get to voice mine successes.
Yeah, absolutely. I love it. Where can people go to learn more about yourself?
Social media wise, like LinkedIn, Ishveen Anand, Twitter, our website, email me, whatever it may be. Thank you.
Of course, yeah. So the last thing that I do on the show is I have my guests leave the audience with a self-inquisitive question, a question that somebody listening can sort of ask themselves throughout the day, maybe something that you've maybe asked yourself or a loved one.
Yeah. Something that's come up recently is, do you have a plan, and do you want to live by a plan? As an entrepreneur, I don't necessarily always have a plan for myself. And I'm not sure if it's the right or wrong thing. So if I could go back and ask my 21-year-old self, I would have said, do you really have a plan? And do you want to have a plan for your life? So maybe that's something people could think about.
Yeah, that's awesome. Had such an amazing time. Thank you so much for coming on. Thank you all for listening. This has been your host, Mark Matry.